Hi, everybody. This is Jonathan Burke with the Outside of the Church AOGP podcast, Season 5, Episode 17. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm here with Jason Roba. This is our Friday podcast for the, let's see, what is today's date? The 18th of August,
That's right.
2023. Give a little time, place, form, and event there. We're going to do a podcast on, basically, we don't have a working title yet, but we'll get a good one. We're going to do a podcast on the differences, and probably some of the similarities. There's going to be some similarities there too, between Dianetics and Scientology. Because a lot of times Dianetics seems to be the redheaded stepchild to Scientology's bigger body of work and everything like that. So you suggested this. So
Yeah.
Where do you want to go with this?
Well, yeah, I think it's really cool to, I don't know, I've got a real affinity for Dianetics. I mean, obviously I've got an affinity for both, but there's something about Dianetics, probably from past track for me, that I've just got a real strong affinity for it. And I think it's one of those things, I want to say it was Phil Spickler said this in one of his interviews with Tatiana about a decade ago, that it's something that anybody can do. Any two people can sit down and do Dianetics. They can have book one on the bookshelf there at home. And anybody, literally anybody can do this. You don't need a meter. You just need two people who are willing to confront and who can speak the same language.
Right. And you know, that's the beautiful thing about that sort of thing, is that, you know, you could take it with you on a camping trip and you can sit there on the picnic table and, you know, in the national or state park or something like that, and get somebody to go into reverie and do something for them, whether, you know, you're just doing it to do it, or, you know, you can do it to handle something that happens while you're there in the park or whatever. It's one of those things. You don't need anything else except a very simple working knowledge of it to make some really big differences.
Absolutely.
So that's one of those make it easy things where, you know, Scientology, you can do objectives, processes, and you don't need anything. You can do assists, and there's Dianetic assists as well. So, you know, those are some compare and contrast on how they're similar. But again, and you know, you can do book one with the meter. There's references we have on the original Dianetics course where LRH talks about you can use a meter to find incidents. You don't have to, but you know, in case of, in sort of, what is it? What do they call it when the world kind of comes to an end?
Shit hits the fan.
Well, yeah, the shit hits the fan. The shit hits the fan. You know, well, there's always book one, which is Dianetics. So
yeah, that one kind of came out as a lash answer for me. Post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, post-apocalyptic. But you know, that's the thing is, you can use it anywhere, pretty much on anyone, even if they're blind. You can still do Dianetics on somebody. If they're mute, probably not, unless you have a tap once for yes. I mean, I have to think it out, but I mean, there's lots of ways you could do it. But
probably probably even with sign language, if both folks speak American Sign Language.
I would imagine so, that you could do that.
Yeah.
So Dianetics has changed quite a bit from 1950 to 1977 to 1980, but it's always remained the same as far as, for the most part, the procedures go. And a lot of Dianetics had a huge influence on the Scientology side, as many people may not be aware. One of which is, in Dianetics, you have a Dianetic chain of events. So you have the most recent event that is closest enough to present time that you're auditing, and you handle that one, and then you go back to the next one and the next one and the next one. Or if the person is in really good shape, you know, they might be able to jump on that chain to just a couple of events and handle something. Well, a few years later, it wasn't exactly a couple, but it was a few years later, you get in Scientology, we have earlier similar. So is there an earlier similar ARC break, earlier similar present time problem, earlier similar miss withhold? invalidation, evaluation. Early or similar, and you take it to a floating needle, very good indicators, and cognition. Dianetics is the same way, with a meter or without a meter, because when the person comes up to cheerfulness, which is pretty much the same thing without having a meter, well, that's the end of that particular Dianetic chain that you've got. Now, come forward to 1977, now you have to get the postulate on. And that's an interesting thing that we should talk about as well.
Yeah.
Because in Scientology, FN Cog VGIs, but in Dianetics, it's FN Cog VGIs, erasure and postulate. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, for people new to the topics of Dianetics and Scientology, we were talking about a chain. And so that chain would be an engram chain. So if we are working with colloquially what we could call just trauma with Dianetics and Scientology, if we're working with trauma and you've got a chain there, you'd be approaching that from the most recent incident of trauma and then going back through similar traumatic incidents on that chain of events. So whatever that is, I like to use, as a veteran, I like to use the combat deployment engram chain. So you've got a guy who, he has a deployment in 2012. You run out the incident on that, and then he's got a one before that in 2008. And then you run out that incident, and then you go back to a deployment in 2004, and you keep going back and back and back and back on that engram chain of incidents and running out the trauma from those combat deployments, correct?
Correct. Now, the difference between doing that in Dianetics and doing that in Scientology is very, very subtle. And we've been doing the axioms, just the last two podcasts this week were Dianetic axioms and Scientology axioms. The interesting thing that the parallel between these two is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to get an as-isness of an event in Dianetics. Because for anything to persist, there is an untruth or a lie behind it, per the Dianetic axioms and the Scientology axioms. And so why a Dianetic traumatic incident, why it persists with a person, why it hangs fire with them, and they have these, what we call locks, where you get hit in the head with a baseball bat at a softball game, and every time you go by a sporting goods store, Dick's Sporting Goods or something like that, for those living in the U.S. or any of the other big chains, you see a baseball bat, you get a headache. Well, that headache is a lock. It's a reminder. And the way this works is, and the way it persists, is there's something there that as the pre-clear, you're not seeing fully. Now, there's a lot more to this we get into on the upper levels and stuff like that. But it is a ridge, and we've talked about ridges a little bit here and there, is that an engram creates a ridge for the person, and the person creating the ridge is the pre-clear. So something's not being viewed for what it is. Okay. So in a Dianetic session, what you're trying to do with the PC is he's got an alter-isness of this situation. He's got some considerations. He's not seeing everything, and he feels like, well, that stupid pitcher, if he hadn't hit me with the ball, the bat wouldn't have banged into my forehead, and that sort of thing. So there's a matter of responsibility that comes up with an alter-isness in a Dianetic image or a Dianetic picture that the person is creating in the reactive mind. And it is safe to say and fair to say that that's what it is. I'm not giving away any secrets here.
Right.
So that the alter-isness is what you're handling in repeating over these incidents, like you were talking about, and you have to get them to look at it, get them to look at it, get them to look at it. And the more that they contact the incident, the more they pull out of it, the more there is an as-isness, the way that it was, which is also an isness, but it turns into an as-isness. And then they go, oh, yeah, I had my footing wrong, and I really wasn't paying attention. I had my attention on, what my dad said to me before I stepped up to the plate, and it kind of pissed me off. And, I was just, I just kind of decided, I didn't want to be there. And then you go, okay, well, it sounds like a postulate to me. You can't say that to him, but you're repeating, getting them to repeat it until they spot this stuff. They get an as-isness. And then you go move on to the next earlier engram on the chain. And I'm not explaining it to you. I'm explaining it to the audience. So
more,
take it away.
Yeah, and this is something that again hasn't existed in previous technologies with Freudian analysis and psychoanalysis. It helped, getting someone to talk about it. I was listening to one of Ron's lectures when he was talking about two-way calm yesterday when I was studying the level 3 course. And he says, the reason why a lot of those therapies worked and why psychotherapy works is because you're getting the person to talk about the thing. And so before Dianetics, there wasn't anything here that was getting that as-isness of something. Sometimes, somebody in a confessional telling their priest, you tell a priest a confessional. I don't know. I didn't grow up.
As a Catholic priest. Yeah.
Catholic priest. So you go to the confessional and you tell the Catholic priest thing, and you get a little bit of an as-isness on it, and there's you're confronting that thing that might not have been confronted before, but you're not going through, and the priest isn't telling you, okay, good, go back to the beginning and pick up whatever additional data you can contact. He doesn't tell you that while you're sitting there in the booth, I don't think. I think
no, and sometimes people just do it all of their own accord, and naturally, they do that sort of a thing. So it's In Scientology, when a person is looking at something, they typically they're looking at something that is of a subjective nature, whereas Dianetics can be subjective as well, because you can run Dianetics on subjective things. But more often than not, Dianetics is more objective, something that happened to you in the physical universe, where Scientology is more subjective about a particular subject or a particular person. But you're doing the same thing. So a lot of the ideas in Dianetics were carried forward into Scientology auditing procedures and everything like that. Because of that, because it's such a workable thing to get the person to look at it from a lot of different angles. Because in Scientology, what you're doing with most Scientology grades, confessionals not being one of them, you're trying to get the person to change their mind about something. Whereas in Dianetics, you're trying to get the person to realize there's more in mind.
Right.
So they're just little to the left, little to the right type things, where these subtle differences come in, but they make a huge difference in the significance of how these things are run with somebody.
Yeah. Now, could you give the audience an example here of something you mentioned, the concept of within Scientology, getting someone to change their mind or their point of view on something? Could you give us an example of that?
Well, for instance, we were talking about help becoming betrayal, which is grade 1 material before the podcast. We were thinking about doing a podcast on help becoming betrayal. For just an inside scoop.
Yeah.
When you have you get somebody to look at help, as simple as in a Scientology process, because Scientology is all about terminals. That's how you get this charge off, is finding out about terminals. Always just looking for terminals. Terminals
being other people, other things?
Other people and other things. Okay, so you would get a list of people who have you, and I'm not auditing any of our audience listeners here, but it would be, give me a list of people who have failed to help you. It's just as simple as that. And the person will say, this person, that person, this person, this person, that person. And we're looking for a read on those people. Anybody that has a read has charge, bypass charge. All charge is bypass charge. It's touched on and it's not dissipated, because it wouldn't be there showing up as charge if it wasn't bypassed. More on that in another podcast. So when you have these people that they're reading as terminals, now you have these people that you can run in this auditing process. Now, see, that's Dianetics is very similar in that wise, that you can do this the way you run Dianetics on a person. So it's very similar in that way, but you're dealing with the engram lock and secondary side as opposed to the terminal side where you're dealing with people. So let's say it was mom, for example. How has mom failed to help you? And that it could just be that question, and that's it. And in Scientology and in Dianetics, and this is an important point to make as well, in Scientology, the repetitive process is king. The repetitive process is, how has mom failed to help you? And they give you an answer and they say, well, she didn't feed me as well as she could. She wasn't a great cook. Okay, thank you. How has mom failed to help you? And you do this over and over and over and over and over. Now, the parallel with Dianetics is you're going to run a particular incident. There's a couple different ways you can run an incident, but you're going to run this incident. We won't get into that right now. You're going to run this incident and you're going to get the person to recount that incident and try and pick up more information as we pass over the incident from the beginning to the end, whatever the duration of the incident is. In Scientology, we're not asking them about the duration of the incident. All we're asking is about the subject matter. How did your mom fail to help you? Now, what that does is the person's going to look at it and, a lot of times on repetitive process, like, I can't think of any other answers. You go, okay, well, take a look there, way out's the way through kind of thing. And what will happen is a lot of times on these processes, what will happen is we have this thing called rudiments, which are your ARC break, your present time problem, miss, withhold, overt, evaluation, and validation, and withhold, not just miss, withhold too. That can be a factor. But what will happen is the person will start to look at how their mom failed to help them, and they'll come up with one of these rudiments. In other words, it's an out rudiment. A rudiment is out when it is irritating, bugging, has the attention of the PC, and it is reading, and it's bugging them because there's charge there.
Never.
So what you're doing when you're running this process is you've uncovered one of these out rudiments, and so you handle it just like you would at the beginning of a session. Say the person has an ARC break with their mom about something and it shows up on the meter. You'd ask them, do you have an ARC break on your mom? Yeah, blah, 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 that sort of thing. And you handle it to FN and you continue on doing the process. This can happen multiple times on any particular terminal. You wanted to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, and for people that are new to Dianetics and Scientology, an ARC break is an upset, a break in affinity, a break in reality, a break in communication, or break in understanding with someone. So that's
right.
Yeah.
And no auditing can occur over an ARC break.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to handle the ARC break first, and as soon as it comes up. So you're getting off these different significances in doing a repetitive process with somebody, and lots of interesting things can occur. But if they can't think of any other answers or anything like that, then there's a rudiment that's out. Get that rudiment back in, and all of a sudden they find answers. It's miraculous. And again, I've said this time and time again in podcasts, but the neat thing about what Hubbard does is he says, you do this, you get this. If this happens, you do this, you get this, this will happen. And everything will come out all right.
Mm-hmm.
And it does. Every time. I've never seen anything like that in any other walk of life. In computer programming might be similar in some ways, that because it's such an encapsulated thing where everything is like a bunch of Russian nested dolls type of a thing. But when Hubbard says you do this, you get this, you do. And if the person can't come up with whatever it is, there's a reason for it. You need to know the reason and you need to know how to handle it.
Well,
and if you're well trained well enough to do it, you can handle it. Same thing with Dianetics. It's infallible, right? You're not necessarily going to handle a rudiment in the middle of a Dianetic chain because it's really beefy, a really beefy area. And in most situations, the ARC break is the incident itself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no need to, and that's the neat thing about Dianetics is you can handle everything with this set pattern of communication. Like you said, you don't need anything else except how to do Dianetic procedure.
Yeah.
So Scientology is a little bit more, it's a little bit more complex. Like if you mentioned like Candy Swanson has a lot to say, and she's one of the original Class 8s, and she actually wrote several bulletins for LRH and let him put up in his name. She kind of feels that, it's an overly complex subject.
Yep.
And, Scientology it can be very simple. It's just, there are a lot of where-tos and therefores, and, if this happens, do this. But it's really just one of those things where the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And, if you don't like the complexities, well, then you don't have to do it. And that's pretty much what Candy did.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a negative way. It just wasn't her cup of tea. He let her go off and start a restaurant instead of be a Class 8.
Well,
because of everything that she'd done for Scientology. So she did a lot early on and then wanted to have a life. And I respect that. But anyway, from a Dianetic standpoint, it's a little bit different. It's an all-in-one, one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beautiful thing with Dianetics, to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Dianetics versus Scientology, I forgot who mentioned this at one point, but with Dianetics, are we kind of addressing the body more, and with Scientology addressing the being more?
Yeah. You're addressing, the Dianetics handles the body, Scientology handles the being. You can do Scientology touch assists, which help get a body in communication with itself and everything. Dianetics has its ways of doing that too, and there are Dianetic assists and everything. So, I mean, there's just two different ways to do it. It just depends on what's going on at the time as to which shoe fits the foot better, given the situation. And, you could do both, and you would probably get more than miraculous results if you did. And it wouldn't be harmful. It's just a matter of what you know. So that's the beauty of it. That's how similar they are.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, Scientology benefited from the Dianetic techniques because Scientology came after it when Ron lost the copyright to Dianetics for somewhere between 1.5 years, 2.5 years. He started Scientology with the Science of Survival and said, if I did it once, I can do it again, and didn't miss a beat. But Dianetics, kind of got left in the background because Scientology had this vast vista of the spiritual world where Dianetics kept going in the background, was dealing with the objective side of things with the body.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't pick it back up until the late 60s.
Yeah.
After going down the road of, okay, well, how do we make a clear quicker? Because Dianetics, I don't know that many of our listeners know this, and it's important to note. If you're doing book 1, the original Dianetics auditing, you can make a clear doing that, but it is a long, hard road to do, and it's going to take hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
Scientology, to make it clear, it's going to take somewhere in the neighborhood of 250, maybe 300 hours at the most. Book 1, though, can take a lot longer than that because you're randomly addressing things that the person can comfortably face and handle in session.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Scientology, some of the forward motion that he made with Scientology for the purpose of Dianetics and Scientology, like TRs,
mm-hmm.
which are the communication drills that get you to be there and be comfortable with the PC no matter what happens. And I will say this, a lot more dramatization happens in Dianetic sessions than ever happens in Scientology sessions. I mean, you can see some pretty bizarre stuff, but it's all understandably bizarre.
Right.
Scientology has its things, but one of the common themes, which we did a podcast on a couple of weeks ago, one of the most common things, and we can get into this, and this is an interesting side rail, by the way. One of the things that can happen is you can go in your first Dianetic session and you can take somebody back on the time track before they were born. And right. I don't mean just before they were born, I mean way back. And that is something that will blow the socks off of just about anybody that receives it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This happens to me on a regular basis when I'm doing Dianetic auditing with PCs. Yeah. It's just amazing. It always is so rewarding to see that occur for someone.
Mm-hmm. And it's not so typical in Scientology auditing to have that sort of thing happen. So, it's curious that, I mean, when you look at it from a Scientology standpoint, the grade chart, which Dianetics is a part of, the grade chart is set up in such a way that you have to do these things on a gradient. Mm-hmm. You have to get the drugs out of the way. You have to get the person's recall and all this stuff. And you're dealing with some really charged subject matter. But you can go in on a book one session. And my first book one session, I was running a prenatal incident, meaning before they were born, where the mom and the dad were trying to cause an abortion. And when I read Dianetics, I was like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, the abortion, yeah. Abortion, and I was like, enough, Ron. I get it. And then my first session, it happens. So there's a little bit of that in the background. Wop, wop, wop. Got egg on my face. Okay, Ron, you were right.
Right.
And I guess it's pretty darn common that people use coat hangers to abort babies.
Yeah.
Who knew? I didn't at 17, 18 years old. But, that's the interesting thing. And Dianetics is a really good way and a really simple way, because it doesn't take hundreds of hours to train somebody, to get two people in a room talking about stuff that is affecting their life in such a way. Well, in some cases, it keeps them totally away from things that otherwise they could be a cause over, and you can handle these things. And you find that when you pull these chains down, they aren't just this time around in this body. They are things that have been haunting you for a very, very long time. Because, let's face it, there's only so many outcomes in the physical universe.
Right.
It's
yep.
90 ways to die sort of thing, there's only so many things that can happen. And then, all right. And then you find out, well, there are other ways to die. They're just not on this planet.
Yeah.
I was standing there, and then I was a pale pink mist the next second. I'm not quite sure what happened to me, but the body was gone. And, and I got, ultimately I was hit by some sort of blaster from the bad guys that I was fighting or something like that. And you just go, well, yeah. So, these sorts of things come up in Dianetic sessions I'm going to say fairly quickly. I mean, almost quickly. The counter side of that is that I've had people that have had phenomenally heavy drug histories, and I audited them on, all I could do was audit them on locks. And those locks contained no pictures. There was no mental image picture there, but there was a significance, and that's really, really interesting. He talks a lot about that a lot early on in Dianetics in the 50-51. So, you have this blackness of case thing going on with drugs where they're completely occluded on Visio, but they have the significance and they know what happened. It's like sitting in a movie theater with a soundtrack and no picture.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy got a lot better. But in that situation, this is why Hubbard developed Scientology. In that situation, he was far, far more well-suited towards doing a purification rundown and a Scientology drug rundown and objectives, not necessarily all in that order, but those things, and ARC Straightwire to handle the locks, because that's what ARC Straightwire is for, is to blow the charge off the locks. That's what Ron developed it for. So, not always does Dianetics serve the purpose. When somebody's really had a rough life, there's not a whole lot they can contact, but it just depends on individual to individual. And Scientology might be more well suited to them, but you also have to take into consideration far more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. All those hours.
Yeah. So, and Dianetics is a great start.
Mm-hmm.
But with it's something that two people can do with, buying a paperback off of eBay or something like that. I wouldn't buy one from the church these days because it's been significantly altered, so they can keep the copyrights, but and probably for other reasons as well. But that's a different podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take much to get started on something like that. Whereas Scientology, you have to do these courses, and you have to buy a meter, and you have to get trained on this, and you have to get trained on that. There's a certain sequence of events, and there's prerequisites and all of that.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get into for anyone.
Yeah. And also too, I would say that in order to do to be a Scientology PC, be a Scientology pre-clear, the one holding the cans and getting audited, there's indoctrination that has to occur for a PC to be a Scientology PC, where I think that Dianetic auditing can be done on anyone without any training, without any indoctrination beforehand.
Well, that's true. I mean, there is a Dianetic CS, what we call Dianetic CS1, that gives you the basic terminology. What's lock? What's an engram? What's a this? What's a that? What's a reactive mind? Just like there is in Scientology, there's Scientology CS1. There's terminology, but the Dianetic principle it's really simple. Is there something there that's happened to you that you have a hard time confronting, and you'd like to have it handled, and it involves something to do with the body or painful emotion.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In Scientology, you're not addressing the body in most circumstances. I mean, it depends. There are things you can address with Scientology that you would still address with Dianetics. And now there's a reason for this, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Well,
so, it's one of those things, but Dianetics, you don't have to know much. Right. What's a lock? What's an engram? What's a secondary? Boom. And what's the reactive mind?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, the analytical mind is you, the thetan.
Right.
We mentioned that in a podcast where LRH mentions that in 1961, that the analytical mind is the thetan. We just didn't have a name for it yet. That's verbatim what he says.
Right. That's you. The one
that's you
looking at life, the one looking at the stuff that happened, the one operating the body.
Right.
Soul, you don't have a thetan, you are a soul, you are a thetan, you are a being. And that's something that not too many people address out there. I don't think there's anybody else that really addresses you as a being. So yeah, when you're going through and getting auditing, you're cleaning up your case.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, and the other thing is go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. You were about to say something.
The other thing is that originally Hubbard said, there's a lot of attention put on the sonic aspect of it, what was said in the engram, because the person is acting off of these command phrases. What are you doing? You'll never be good in life, and that's part of the engram. The person doesn't know what they're doing, and they're not good in life because it's a command phrase while they were in pain. But later on, he says it's not the audio, it's the amount of force.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a reason for this, and it behooves people to understand that anytime, I'll give you an example, and this is a good physical universe example of why engrams persist, is anytime something comes at you, let's say you're in a car wreck, what do? Right before the other car hits you, and you see it out of the corner of your eye, you resist.
Yeah. Try to not
you tense up.
Yep.
And this is why you have to go to the chiropractor for 2 years afterwards. It quite literally is why, and then that's why it is an engram as well. It has to be noted that you are trying to hold your position.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a ridge. And that ridge sticks there in, on, and around the body. And in so doing, when you find out what it was that you are not looking at that caused this thing to happen in the first place, all of a sudden those ridges just melt away. Now, in Scientology, we have ways to handle ridges as well, called ridge running.
Mm-hmm.
So, right there, they're one and the same. They're just there's two different ways you can cut the roast, so to speak, and handle it. But, the resistiveness to the force of it is what causes that goals, problems, mass, which is a Scientology concept, not a Dianetic concept. So you can see that they there's just this delicate fabric where they're interwoven between each other almost everywhere, because once you understand the principles, you're like, gosh, that's really like Dianetics, and that's really like Scientology. Yeah, because they're almost one and the same in a lot of ways. You don't mix the two. You don't need to, and you don't have to. But you don't do a repetitive process and then say, okay, we're going to run it as a Dianetic Engram. Because there's no need to. You don't understand it if you're doing something like that. But that which we resist, we become, holds true to Dianetic incidents and trauma. The more you resist it, the more solid it gets.
Right. So would a good example of that be with Dianetics, with the ridge, with resisting something? So say you've got a young woman who's been just beat by her husband. It's just totally pummeled by him. And every time her husband strikes her, she has to tense up, put an arm up, and her spine and her arm and all of her muscles that are there to resist that punch, and her jaw, whatever it is, those all get tense. There's also that energy that she's putting out to resist her husband right at that moment in time. So this happens.
That's right.
Say it happens 300 times. She gets beat by him when she's between the ages of 19 and 22. She gets divorced at 22 from this husband and moves on. And so going forward from there, anything about a husband, the terminal of a husband, the terminal of a man, the terminal of someone who looks like him. Oh, are you still there, Jonathan?
Okay. 119, we had a dropout.
Oh, okay. Let me make note of that. Interesting content with what I'm talking about. Are you still there? You're frozen. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. All right. We froze up. Okay. So, I'll pick it up from when we talked about the divorce at 22 years old. So
That's right.
So she and her husband get divorced at the age of 22 when she's 22 years old. Now going forward, she's got that ridge there of resisting the punches and strikes from her husband, where she tenses up her spine, tenses up her jaw, puts an arm up, and has that mental resistance there towards a husband, towards a man, towards...
These are some of the similarities and differences that we have in Dianetics and Scientology. I hope you all enjoyed the podcast. We're going to cut a little short due to some technical difficulties with the internet between the Atlantic, the United States, and South Africa. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we will see you on Monday with our next one. Namaste, and we love you. Bye-bye.